Hey everyone, I just want to take a chance to put together a very basic and very informal tutorial to SchoolNet since we've talked about it during our PLTs. I wanted to put together this little screencast to help you if you'd be interested in trying it yourself or if you just forget how to do something we've talked about. So the first thing you're going to want to do is log into our Wake ID portal and you're going to click on Home Base. Now it'll ask you to type in your number. And then after you do that, it will pop up to the screen you will need for SchoolNet itself. So SchoolNet will always be this little red bubble with a white schoolhouse in it. Now, if you've never used SchoolNet before, this may take a little bit of time to boot up because they have updated the site. So it may try to take you through some things that you may have not seen before or that the site doesn't recognize on your computer because you've never used it before. So there's a couple different tools that you can use on here, but today I just want to show you how to actually create a test that way you can practice. And I know we've talked about creating warm-ups and exit tickets and things like that. So I'll show you the rest of this after we practice a few times giving these in our classrooms. But the first thing you're going to want to do to create a test is click this little arrow next to assessments. Now here you have a couple different options, but again, we're just looking at creating a test. Now, something I do want to point out is test co-authoring. So if we're planning on giving a benchmark or a midterm or a practice final, you can add other teachers to your test, and as you create it, they'll be able to see your edits, and you guys can actually put it together. So first thing, we're always going to want to create. So manual, you are going to click that if you want to create your own test from scratch. Now, the nice thing about SchoolNet is it has hundreds, in some cases, questions that are pre-made for you with the answers. They have some extended response. They have political cartoons and charts and everything else you could want in a social studies test. But manual is if you want to use your own test and your own questions to create your test. So if you've been teaching for a while and you have tests that you really like and you want to keep using, the bad part is you have to type them all in yourself, but they'll be here forever and you're going to get data that aligns with those standards that you test. Now, I always use the Express version simply because not only do I get to see the questions that they've generated for me, but I also get to add my own questions. So early in my career when I first started using this and I was still pretty new to creating tests, I had a couple questions that I liked that I wanted to keep, and then I imported some of their questions. So it's kind of a mixture of both. So I personally suggest using the Express questions because they're a little more rigorous. You get to pick which standards and everything else that you want. So I suggest creating Express, but if you're just testing something small like a quick vocabulary check or an exit ticket or warm-up, manual may be the way to go for you. So we'll click Express for now. Now, up here is where you set everything that you need for your test. So test name, I'll just name this practice since, again, I'm not going to give this to my students. We'll scroll down to social studies. Your grade level, again, I'll just pick 9th grade since we've talked about it in world history. Your standards document will be your social studies. Test category you want to obviously keep in your classroom. The next two you don't have to worry about. And then I just check the test item defaults just to be sure everything's there. Again, I never change anything. If you want to mess around with it, go ahead, but I have never changed a thing up there. Your test settings, this is where you can actually add accommodations for your students. So if your kids go out to test, this actually makes it a little bit easier for them. So you can turn the text to speech. So I always, if I have ESL students, I change the text to speech to Spanish for them. Obviously, the only two languages you have are English or Spanish, but I must give you kind of a disclaimer. If you do enable the text to speech for passages, extended ones, it does take a lot longer to publish this test. So just keep that in mind. This isn't something you're going to be able to create 10 minutes before class starts and expect to be able to give the test as your students are walking in. So just be mindful if you click enable talk to speech for your passages that it will take a little bit longer. Now, if you want to print your tests, which is completely doable, the students would just take it normally like a normal test, fill it out, and you would grade it. But SchoolNet does grade it for you if you use the features that this has online. So me personally, I never really give it online. or excuse me, I never actually give it in print. So I just click some of these off. Now I have a couple students who prefer the paper version, or their IEPs or 504s require them to have a paper version, or they've expressed that it makes it easier for them. So I always leave at least one of these two checked. That way I can print it out if I need to. So after you've done that, you'll select the standards. And again, this will take a little bit because it's generating basically the outline for your test and the standards document and everything that you've gone through. So if it takes a little bit, don't stress. So again, you see your standards document, your subject, your grade level. Here is where you'll pick your standards document. So again, we're using world history. So there are 1,300 questions, which is actually quite a bit. But make sure you just don't select world history, because if you do, you're going to get a test with 1,300 questions on it. So you're going to hit the plus sign, and this gives you your broad standards. So again, these numbers represent the number of questions that are associated with that standard. These are just your general standards. You are going to want to hit the plus sign next to each of these to get your key vocabulary, key people, really the narrowed down standards. This would be exactly like the unpacked standards document that we can view through DPI that tells us exactly what we should be teaching in each unit. So again, I'm not going to actually create a real test, so I'll just select a couple standards to show you how it works. So I'll just select those two. Again, make sure you click the plus sign. It is very, very, very important that you guys select the plus sign. That way you can actually see how many questions are related to that standard. So after you pick the ones that you want, again, you can pick as many standards as you want or as few as you want. It just depends on what you're assessing. So you'll add the test map. Now again, if you pick 5 or 6 or 7 different standards, this is going to take quite a bit of time. So just keep that in mind. Now, it'll say how many available items there are. So there's 22 for that standard, and there are 30 for that standard. Now, if you pick 5 or 6 different standards, you could have hundreds of questions here. Again, we're just going to say I'm giving this as a quiz, so I don't need to see every single question. So I'm just going to go through 30 questions. Again, if you don't pick the full number, you may be missing questions that are associated with what you're assessing. But again, if you're doing this just as a brief quiz or a warm-up or an exit ticket, you should be able to find enough to do it in there. So you'll click Build Express Test. And I will show you guys how to actually add manual items if there's some test questions that you want to add from your own personal test bank. And again, this will all take a little bit of time. It just depends on how many standards and how many questions you want to view. Now, this next part is probably the most tedious part of the entire thing. So it will show you how many questions there are out of the number you picked, the information that's related to them, the types of questions they are. It tells you the standard, how many points it's worth, and the correct answer. Now, you can actually edit these questions. I have done that in the past because, for example, say we're talking about the development of agriculture and how that pertains to civilization. Maybe I didn't teach it specifically this way. I can click Actions and Edit, and I can edit this question. So I can actually edit the questions they have, which makes it nice because you can kind of personalize it to your students. Now, if I'm only looking for 10 of these questions and I just wanted to pick through some, you'll hit Edit Items. And again, this will take a second. It'll pop up a question. And if you don't like this question, you'll simply hit Delete. And you'll hit Delete. Very, very simple here. So again, here's talking about Mesopotamia. Say that was from a previous unit that I'm not testing anymore. I would simply click that delete button because I'm not testing it, and it'll remove it from my test. Now, as I said, I'll show you how to pick or select the option to add your own questions. So you'll hit Add Item. We'll just do a true false. And again, I know that's not a question we would actually ask, but you'll select your answer. It'll give it a point value. Now, some teachers run into a problem as they're doing this because they do not select the standards. So you have to make sure you select the standards. And you'll be able to scroll down to our world history standards. Same process. You'll select the down arrow. And it gives you your unpacked standards. You'll hit save and close, and now it has added your question to the test map. So that is how you would add your own item to the test map. Just make sure you hit save to save it. There are times where you have to hit save once or twice. It just depends on how the site's feeling that day, but it says all changes saved. Now, say I have all the questions I want. Say I'm done, I have the questions, I created my test map, everything is exactly how I want it. You'll click return to test details. And again, this will take a little bit of time. You will click ready to schedule. Now this will walk you through everything. So you have your private draft right now. The next step will be ready to schedule. If there are any errors, they will tell you where the errors are and what you have to fix. So again, this will take a minute or two. And don't get discouraged if there's an error. It might be with the one that you created, or it might be because you edited one, or one isn't aligned to a standard. It does happen from time to time, so do not stress if it says there's an error. They're usually a simple fix because it tells you exactly what it is. So it says it's ready to schedule. You'll click schedule. Now you get to pick your date, your end date, and your score due date. So obviously everything is going to be a little bit different here because we're not in school. So we'll say we'll do it the 16th. We'll do it today. And you can end it the same day. So I always try to do it after the next advantage time. I know that's a little far-fetched, but you know how it is. Students are absent, and I always like to give them an advantage time to do it or do test corrections. So you can prevent the students from accessing the test results until after the end date. I'm not really concerned with that. If you want to share it with your Power Teacher gradebook, which is a little intimidating, I'm not going to lie to you because you have to put a lot of trust in this thing. But if you share your scores, it will add it to your class under the category with as many points as you set it as. So it's pretty convenient. I always do mine manually. So again, that's just me. If you select to share your scores, hey, it works all the same. Now, you can require the secure tester application. This means students cannot leave the windows. So you can select that. And then you have to, I always change the code, but you have to set a test code. You can leave it to the one that they have. I always try to give it something that I'll remember. So I always like to show them their scores upon submission. Display this test. So this button just shows them that it pops up and they have a test to take. You can prevent the students from accessing it outside of these windows. You can make it a time test. I don't usually. I always scramble the question order just to uphold our academic integrity. Scramble answer choices. Again, that's just all relative. And then when you hit edit assignment, and again, there you go. See, it says this passcode is already in use. So it tells you if there are errors. I'm glad that came up so you guys can see what an error screen looks like. But this part here allows you to select it or select which classes you will give the test to. So as we go down here, it tells you this is being published because I didn't edit the classes that it was being assigned to. Again, I'm trying to make this really short. Basically, your test is created at this point. Remember, going back to that last screen I was just on, if you edit the assignment, just make sure you select the classes that you currently have. This is just a practice for me to show you guys very briefly how to create a test. But down there in that bottom on the last screen where it says edit assignment, it was right here. That's just selecting your classes. If you don't select your specific classes, then it's going to show up on every single student you have. It's going to show up on their SchoolNet. So just keep that in mind. Now, this is your test code. Now, obviously, it's not completed because the kids haven't taken it yet. So, again, when everything is done, this will be green. It'll say the students have taken it, and then everything's great. And in a future screencast, I'll show you guys how to view assessment data and where to go for that. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. But again, I wanted to make this short just so I could show you how to create a test. And again, we could talk about this more at our next PLT. Thanks, guys.